Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thank you for coming. My name is Amy Draves, and I'm here to introduce Matthew May, who is joining us as part of the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. Matthew's here today to discuss his book, The Laws of Subtraction: 6 Simple Rules for Winning in the Age of Excess Everything. Most of us may feel that the simple life is a thing of the past. There are endless choices and options that we are each faced with daily. Matthew argues that success demands a skill of subtraction. When you remove the right things in the right way, something very good happens. Matthew May is the author of 3 award-winning books, The Elegance Solution, In Pursuit of Elegance, and The Shibumi Strategy. He is an advisor on innovation to several companies and is a regular contributor to the American Express Open Forum Idea Hub. He also is the founder of Edit Innovation, an ideas agency based in Los Angeles. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Well, Happy New Year. Right, it's probably everybody's first full week back at work. So what better way to start off a new year with perhaps a different way of looking at the world? And that's really what I'd like to do today, is to talk about something that's very near and dear to your heart. It's in your tagline, Turning Ideas into Reality, which is ideas. I'm an ideas guy. I can't stop thinking about ideas. My wife often accuses me of being too much in my head because I even love the idea of ideas. So I guess that makes me a meta idea person. And I want to talk today a little bit about ideas that of a certain breed. You heard it in some of the titles of previous books, but there are ideas that answer a particular question. And the question is this: and it's something that we all face, whether we're a parent, whether we are president of a company, whether we're just run-of-the-mill professional trying to make it through the workaday world of corporate life. How do you stand out and stay relevant in what I think all of us could admit is a fairly distracting and disruptive business environment and world? We hear all the time about disruptive business models. Certainly, all of us are deluged with text messages and push notifications and social media that we can't keep up with. I think 10 years ago, I saw a study in Social Demographics magazine, this was 10 years ago now, that the average worker in a fairly large organization gets upwards of 250 interruptions a day between emails and meetings and voicemails and people popping in your office. That was 10 years ago. That's before we had all the texting and the push notifications and the social media and the tweets and you name it. So I can only imagine that it's probably quadruple that today. So how do you stand out and stay relevant when the world is changing so fast? When the signal-to-noise ratio is not that good, is far more noise than there is signal, how do you cope with all of that? And the simple answer, I think, to the question, or the quick answer to the question, is this: you've got to consistently design and deliver elegant solutions. Elegant solutions. Now that begs another question. What the heck is an elegant solution? And how do you make them work, and how do you create them, and how do you create an environment, a corporate culture that consistently produces them? So the deeper question, the real question that I want to tackle today is this one: what are elegant solutions, why do they matter, and how do you create them? And this was actually my challenge several years ago, 10 years ago as a matter of fact. And by the way, I spoke about this topic in this very part of Microsoft. I don't know if any of you were here in the audience at the time 6 years ago. This is my second visit here. And I was still struggling with this question of what's an elegant solution. And so let me take you back 10 years and bring you up to speed and give you a little sense of the context and the backstory that prompted this question. At the time, this was 2003, I was midway in an 8-year run as a full-time advisor to a company by the name of Toyota, down at their U.S. headquarters in Southern California, Torrance, California. Interestingly enough, 2006 was when I was here speaking to Microsoft. That was the year the first book that I wrote came out. That's when I left the partnership, and I've only just recently, in the last couple of months, begun advising them again in the marketing world at Toyota. But what made my life so difficult was that they had this internal mantra, and it went something like this. People don't want our products and services, they want solutions. And when it comes to solutions, simple is better. Elegant is better still. The problem was that nobody bothered to define for me what an elegant solution really was. I knew by virtue of the fact of looking at certain ideas that were rejected what elegance wasn't. And by the way, I looked up in the dictionary. You can't, if you look up elegant solution in the dictionary, you're not going to find it. You're going to find elegance, which will say something like cleverly apt, simple, ingenious, as in an elegant solution, which sort of gets you right back to where you were in the first place, and it certainly doesn't tell you how to craft an elegant solution and implement it and make it actionable. I knew by virtue of the fact, as I said, what wasn't elegant. Anything that was excessive, confusing, wasteful, unnatural, hazardous, hard to use, or ugly. And I tried to find an image that captures all 7 of those sort of deadly sins. This is what I came up with. There's nothing elegant about that. I don't know how to make heads or tails out of that. It's probably life endangering for those of us who aren't used to looking at that kind of thing. So I knew what elegance wasn't, but I didn't know exactly what elegance was. And it really struck me because midway in that 8-year run with Toyota, I ran up against a project that I had no idea what to do with. I mean, I was hired to help them develop fresh ideas, not because I'm an especially smart person or a great designer or anything. I'm good with people, and I'm good with facilitating creative teams. But I was out of ideas, which is not a good thing. When you're hired for ideas and you run out of them, this is not good. And I was so frustrated. I did not know what to do. I did not know what to tell him. This project had me up against a brick wall, and I was ready to walk out the door and say, listen, I cannot help you any longer. It's been a great 4 years. And I came into, and I guess I wasn't doing a very good job of hiding how frustrated I was, because I came into work, and I didn't have an office or anything like that. I had I worked at a conference cubby, if you will. And taped to the back of the chair that I sat in usually was a little piece of poetry. That poetry happened to be, as I found out later, 2,500 years old, circa 600 BC, by a gentleman philosopher, Chinese philosopher by the name of Lao Tzu. And it goes like this: 30 spokes share the wheel's hub. It's the center hole that makes it useful. Shape clay into a vessel. It's the space within that makes it useful. And I'm sorry I'm reading to adults. I know you can understand this. Cut doors and windows for a room. It's the holes which make it useful. Therefore, profit comes from what is there, usefulness from what is not there. And my first reaction, quite honestly, was that someone wants me gone. I'd be more useful that way. And I stopped, and it made me think. And a number of things happened all at once. And I shouldn't say all at once. It wasn't one of those, epiphanies. It was sort of an emerging awakening that there's another way to look at a problem. The first thing it made me do was to figure out who this guy Lao Tzu was and what else he had to say on the topic. And lo and behold, I found another little piece of philosophy from him that remains. And you see it in those of you who happen to have a copy of the Laws of Subtraction in front of you. This is sort of my go-to mantra. To attain knowledge, add things every day. To attain wisdom, subtract things every day. And I began to think about the problem in front of me. And I was doing what comes naturally, at least to the Western mind, which is to think about what to do, not necessarily what to not do. And as I did that, certain information, my radar screen was sort of enlivened, if you will. Certain pieces of information sort of came to me. It's sort of interesting when you're out of options and alternatives and you consider other ways of thinking. All these things that were already out there that you just had ignored because it wasn't a problem to you sort of come front and center. And that's really what happened. I happened to read, and it was just this time, 2003, just before the new year, actually, I happened to read an essay in USA Today. And I was traveling at the time. And it was about the new year. And it was by Jim Collins. I'm sure that's a name that's at least somewhat familiar to you. Has written a number of best-selling, mega best-selling books, Good to Great probably being the one that stands out for most people. But he had in the USA, in the forum section of USA Today, an essay, and it was called, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Best New Year's Resolution, a Stop Doing List. And I thought, a stop doing list. What the heck is that all about? It was just a 600-word essay, but as I read it, and he told this story, he told a very interesting story, I thought, and he concludes it with this: a great piece of art is composed not just of what's in the final piece, but equally what is not. That was a conclusion to a story that he told about his own life and how he came up with the strategy of creating a stop doing list whenever he creates a to-do list, whether it's a daily task list or even at this time of the year when it is you're setting your stretch resolutions for the year. He told the story of how he left Stanford University as an MBA back in the day, and he did what every sort of upstanding young MBA does, which is to take a job in a big company and start scratching and clawing your way to the middle. His chosen company was Hewlett-Packard. And he, as Stanford was wont to do, they had people come back and do guest lectures. And the course that had him back was his favorite course. It was on creativity and innovation in business. And he came back and he gave a talk. And his professor, one Rochelle Myers, pulled him aside after the talk and said, "Listen, Jim, spent a lot of time with you while you were here. And I have to tell you, I think you're going down the wrong path in life. Let me give you a little thought exercise to go away with." And this is what good teachers do, right? They create learning moments out of things that seem wrong to them. And she said, imagine that you're given $20 million free and clear, but you only have 10 years left to live. What would you do? And more importantly, what would you stop doing? And guess what rose to the top of his list? His job. His job. I mean, she was right. He hated his job. What he really wanted to do was to study the best organizations, the best companies out there, try and distill and decode the things that made them so successful and write about it. To be a management educator on the professional side of education, if you will, not necessarily the academic side. He left his job, he took his car, he drove down to Southern California, camped out on the doorstep of one Peter Drucker and banged on his door and said, "I really would like to follow in your footsteps." Peter Drucker was sort of a thought starter, a thought leader around management, and how can I get started? And he concludes the essay this way. But here's how he describes creating a stop doing list. And it's incredibly difficult. It's going to sound simple when I describe it, but it's hard. Whatever your to-do list is, whether it's a daily task or your big resolutions, you put them down as you normally would. Step 1, nothing different than how you do it now. Step 2, nothing different than how you do it now. Prioritize them as you normally would. But now here's step 3. You take that list and you take a pair of scissors and you cut out the bottom 20% and you throw it away. That becomes your stop doing list. Throw it away. It doesn't appear on any other future to-do list. It goes in the circular file forever. It's incredibly difficult to do. We don't want to let go of that. We think we can do all of these things, but the truth is when we get down to that bottom 20%, we don't give it the attention that it deserves anyway. We suboptimize our performance on that bottom 20%, and this provides a little bit of focus, which is slightly different than prioritization. And he goes on to say here that it's the discipline to cut out what may have taken years to build and to create that marks, that really truly marks a work of art, whether it's a symphony, whether it's a book, whether it's a business, most important of all, a life. That came to me and it stopped me and it reinforced this message that had been taped to the back of my chair. Then I read a quote that I still love to this day by Oliver Wendell Holmes. And it went like this: "I would not give a fig for simplicity this side of complexity, but I'd give my life for simplicity on the other side of complexity." Now, that sort of struck me as something akin to this notion of elegance that was floating around Toyota. It wasn't that it was something dirt simple. It's that there's a very complex thing that Toyota was creating, a car, very, very complex piece of machinery, But how do you make it simple for a user? How do you make it intuitive? How do you hide that complexity? How do you exploit it, make it invisible, make it usable? That's the simplicity on the other side of complexity, and that's what Oliver Wendell Holmes was talking about, and that made me stop and think. And the reason I have a picture here of a chessboard is that it's the simplicity on this side of complexity versus simplicity on the other side of complexity is the difference, I think, between chess and checkers. Both games, same number of players. Both games played on the same board. But if you had to come up with one word that marks the distinction, the difference between checkers and chess, what would it be? Strategy, right? Chess is far more strategic. I've been playing checkers with my daughter, who's now 10, since she was about 4. It's basically single moves or multiple moves, but it's the same move. It's about adding, because you're trying to accumulate the other person's army. It's very quick to play. It's fun to learn and play. It doesn't take a lot of thinking in advance. But if you were to watch a master chess tournament, which I'm not sure why you would want to do that, because you look at them up on the stage and what are they doing? And I'm not talking about the kind in the park where they're like bing, bing with the clock, but the masters, right? Where they're thinking for days, and it's just there's no action whatsoever. They're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4 moves in advance. What's my opponent going to do? And the whole thing is about winning the game in what number of moves? Most moves, least moves. Least number of moves, and what are you trying to do? Immobilize. Checkmate your opponent's king. Right? It's a completely different, fundamentally different way of looking at a game board. I think in our organizations, and I don't know if your experience is the same, but sometimes I don't even think we get to checkers. I think a lot of times we're playing whack-a-mole. Do you know this game? Maybe with kids and you've gone to Chuck E. Cheese and the little mole pops up and you whack it with a hammer. That's our life, right? If the fire pops up, we got to figure out a way to squelch it. So that struck me. Then I saw a connection between simplicity and subtraction by John Maida. He had a website at the time. At the time, he was at the MIT Media Lab, and this was before he became the president of the Rhode Island School of Design. And he had these 10 laws of subtraction that he wrote about. And his 10th law is simplicity, is about subtracting the obvious and adding the meaningful. All of these things sort of were different ways to recast that Lao Tzu wisdom, and I thought, I got to solve my problem, not by thinking about what to do, not about adding, but subtracting. And it allowed me to solve the problem. It allowed me to remain at Toyota for 4 years, but most importantly, it sent me off on a quest for elegance solutions everywhere. Elegance solutions sort of became my life and has been for the better part of 10 years. So to me, subtraction really is about a new skill. It's a new way of looking at a problem. Generally speaking, every time we come up with a decision, an important decision, whether it's a business idea, a business strategy, a life decision, generally speaking, there are 3 important choices that we make. What do you leave in? Or what do you put in versus what do you leave out? What do you pursue versus what do you ignore? And what do you do versus what do you not do or don't? Most of us, by nature, are hardwired to focus on the first half of each of those choices. What do I put in? What do I pursue? And what do I do? We are not trained. We are not disciplined in the second half of those choices. But that's where the power is. And this is where the thinking differently comes in. And this is where ideas that become great innovations, I think, by and large, often live. And this is what helps us cut through noise and disrupt other businesses, if you will. And if you don't think that if you think I'm making it up about this being a different way of thinking, it quite literally and scientifically is. Subtraction lights up the brain slightly differently under functional magnetic resonance imaging than addition does. As a matter of fact, studies have shown, they've studied accident victims that have had brain injuries, and interestingly enough, many times after that accident, you're not able to both add and subtract. You're able to do one or the other oftentimes, but not both. They're in the same general region of the brain, but the wiring is slightly different, as you can see here. Slightly different way of thinking. And it certainly is, in the West, something that we're not really disciplined or even soft-wired to do. But what I'd like to do then is to take you on that journey and the lessons that I have gleaned over the course of especially the last 6 years when I've been out in the world, all over the world, collecting ideas that I think are impactful and looking at them and trying to distill them into laws, if you will, a heuristic, if you will. So I can't claim any credit for coming up with these. They're just simply common elements that I've seen out of about 2,000 of what I consider to be very, very impactful and compelling ideas. There are 6 of them, and I'll tick through them very quickly by way of story. And then we'll open up the floor to some discussion and some dialogue. Lesson number 1. I'm going to go one better than Lao Tzu. I'm going to go one better than Jim Collins, who said that that both of them sort of said that it's a mix of what's there and what isn't there. I think that sometimes, and oftentimes, what isn't there can trump what is. And that's the overarching lesson for me in all of this. All of the others are sort of derivative of that. So here's an example of this. What you are looking, and by the way, if you know what this is, don't shout it out, but raise your hand. Just a quick survey. Okay, a few of us. So what you are looking at, these 3 pairs of perpendicular lines, 3 sets of perpendicular lines, represent something that's so ubiquitous. You couldn't make it through the rest of the day without using it at least one, probably multiple times. But there's a lot of information missing here. And I'm going to give you a hint. And once I give you that hint, you're going to be able to decode this in a different way. And you're going to see it in an all new light. What you're looking at here is the uppercase version of the most widely used letter in the English language. It is, everybody shout it out, E. And E. Everyone pretty much sees it. If you don't see it right now, that's fine. Not everyone sees it all the time. But what do the black lines represent? The shadow, right? And the E exists in the white space. Did I create that, or did you create that? You all created it, right? Your brain, I gave you a piece of information. Your brain recognized a pattern out of that data point, and it changed your mind. It actually changed your mindset. And let me prove it to you, because here's the tough part and the aha part of this little diagram. You might think to yourself, well, that's just an optical illusion, a parlor trick. Well, no, it isn't. Because what I'd like for you to do right now is to unsee the E, and let me know how that goes. Very difficult to do. It's very difficult to go back to the way you saw it when you were innocent, before I gave you that little piece of information. Very, very difficult to go back when you were looking at it every different which way to try and come up with, well, what the heck is it that I'm looking at? Now, is there application to this in the real world beyond a paper exercise? Absolutely. So let me give you a few of them. One that seems to be a very, very direct correlation, an application of this, is the very famous FedEx logo. We see it every day. It's ubiquitous. You've probably seen it a dozen times today already. This is thought to be one of the most creative and impactful corporate identities ever. And it's not because of the bold fonts. It's not because of the purple and the orange coloring or whatever graphics they happen to use. Why is this thought to be so impactful? The arrow. How many people have not ever seen the arrow until this particular time in your life? Okay, for those of you who haven't seen it, the rest of us, tell them where it is. Between the E and the X. And that is there purposefully. I got to speak with Lyndon Leader, who was the designer of that, because he was messing with a couple of different fonts. This was back in the mid-1990s when Landor Associates took on the role of taking the old Federal Express logo, which had become, the Federal Express had become, customers started calling it FedEx and using it as a verb. And their brand had changed because, customers had sort of done that. But most of the world didn't know that FedEx shipped globally. They thought it was just a domestic operation. They wanted something that connoted forward speed, acceleration, and progress. And this out of 200 logo designs was the winning logo. Out of 22 senior executives that saw a number of presentations at FedEx, Fred Smith was the only one who asked the question, is there a white arrow in there? Because they didn't tell them going into the presentation. And they said, yes, absolutely. And he said, sold. And you know what all the other folks wanted to do immediately when they saw that white arrow? Guess. Fill it in. They wanted to call attention to it. What makes this so compelling is the fact that there's a little bit of mystique and intrigue here. And once you see it, the only thing you really sort of pay attention to is the white arrow. You sort of ignore the rest. So here's a good application, I think, of the law, of the lesson. What isn't there can often trump what is. Okay, so that's fine. That's still sort of a paper exercise, a graphic illustration. Matt, give me something that's a little bit more tangible. Fine. Here's my bicycle seat. I spend 10 to 12 hours when I can on a bicycle. Allow me to tell you and share with you that the life-saving part of this feature is not what's there. It's what isn't there. Okay, for obvious reasons. This is a $300 item. It's less than 300 grams. It's made up of carbon and leather and some cushioning. All the rest of the world, except for Sella Italia in Italy, was thinking about how to pump up the padding on a bicycle seat to make it more comfortable. They thought about taking material away because it's all about pressure in all the wrong spots. So, and they've made, that's all they do. That's all this company makes is bicycle seats, and they make a very fine living at it, and it's mostly about what isn't there. This is another example, all right, from my Toyota days. This, if you don't know what it is, well, I'm sure you do. What is this? Yeah, it's a box. It is. Talk about, thinking outside the box, right? This is the first iteration of the Scion XB, and I remember when I saw the prototype of this, design sketches of this, and I thought to myself, and I guess I was showing my age, who in their right mind would, much less buy one of these things, want to be seen in one of these things? I mean, it just looks like a toaster got together with a milk truck and had babies. But this saved Toyota. They realized at the end of last century, year 2000, 1999, a couple of years after I came on, that their customer base was aging. And that they needed to do something to attract Gen Y, because if not, by 2020, they're going to be out of business. They're really going to be out of business. And guess what? They had tried marketing the Toyota brand to Gen Y folks. It fell flat. They even had a special group inside Toyota called the Genesis Group. The average age was like 38. And they were trying to reach an 18 to 24 demographic. Not a great idea, right? Had no concept of that target market. And the kids were saying, I don't care if you stick it on your advertising on my cell phone. Yeah, it doesn't matter to me. Put it in Dub Magazine, I don't care. Any of your alternative marketing strategies, it's still the car that mom and dad have in the driveway and in the garage, and I don't want to really own a Toyota. So what they realized was that marketing wasn't enough. They needed an innovation. And they went back out into the marketplace, as Toyota is known to do. I don't know why they didn't do it in the first place, and they practiced one of their disciplines, which is Genchi Genbutsu. It means go look, go see. And this is what all great designers do. They get out and they do what? You probably saw 60 Minutes last night on design thinking, and they used a word, right? Those of you who happen to see it, empathy. Empathy is a fancy word for going out and living in the shoes, living in your customer's experience for a while to become that user, to infiltrate them and understand the problems they're trying to solve. Well, when they did that, an aha moment came. Toyota marketers went out into the field, did their Genchi Genbutsu, and interestingly enough, where they did it is kind of curious and funny. Here's the visual. Toyota marketers attending raves. You know what a rave is, right? Underground, hip-hop, techno kind of party. Toyota marketers? Okay, maybe it doesn't strike you as funny. Struck me as funny. And they went to extreme sporting events, and they went to urban art shows. And they got this predominant theme coming out of the new millennials especially, which was personalization. It wasn't so much about their stuff. It was about what they could do to their stuff. You saw it in even their bodies, right? You could see it in the tattoos and the piercings. But a pair of jeans, it wasn't the pair of jeans, it's what they could do to that pair of jeans. Once they got that theme of personalization, they thought what we really need to do is to provide a completely spare vehicle. And Gen Y hates advertising. We're not going to advertise the thing. This product was never about the car. It was completely about what was left out of it. Marketing, advertising, and 100+ standard options and accessories. $15,000 car, the kids were snapping it up off the dealer lot as quick as it landed, and they're putting another 15 grand into the car. Carbon fiber dashes, flat panel TVs. Where I live in Southern California, there was a dirt lot. I remember it very distinctly. Any Saturday morning, I could go and I'd see 15 to 20 of these things lined up. No one was looking at the car. They were looking about what they had done to the car. Hatchbacks open, how they had tricked out the interior of their vehicle. What isn't there can often trump what is. I happen to think this saved Toyota. Now, next iteration of this, they forgot what brought them to the party. It got bigger, it got softer, it got less edgy, and it didn't have quite as much success with it. So, lesson number 2, law number 2, if you will. The simplest rules create the most effective experience. What you are looking at here happens to be something called an intersection in Holland that is designed under what's called a shared space concept. And I don't know if you're familiar with what shared space is. It began as an experiment in European towns a dozen or more years, actually 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And what they would do was to take high traffic intersections, because they didn't have a lot of money for traditional traffic controls and lights and signs and all of that. So they said, well, let's redesign the space so that it's completely ambiguous and it's self-organizing. And when you come into these intersections, and by the way that I found out about this was I was in Sweden in 2007. A year after I left Toyota, I was giving an all-day presentation, and I was collecting ideas in that part of the world. I asked my sponsors, do you got anything in this part of the world where something has been removed and greater impact has occurred because of it? And I said, well, you could go to Finland and study their school system, and you can go to Holland. Take a look at what they're doing with their traffic in towns. I go, okay, what are they doing? They're getting rid of all their traffic controls. I say, excuse me? This is a 20,000 plus vehicle, pedestrian, bicycle, lorry, you name it, coming through these intersections. When you come into these intersections, and I had to go and look, when you come into these intersections, it's completely ambiguous. The curbs have been taken down to street level to be, completely level. They've replaced asphalt and concrete with, as you see, cobblestones here. There are trees and fountains and sidewalk cafe seating out right in the middle where you think you should be driving. And it looks to be absolutely chaotic, but it works. Let me show you. Not a roundabout, yeah. So this is crazy, right? Why would you do that on purpose? It's one thing to live, in a third world or developing country where you don't have that in the first place and you just get used to it. But to go back and to redesign on purpose something to remove all of those things that are supposed to protect our lives, that's just nuts. No, it isn't. Traffic flow is doubled and the number of accidents cut in half, often taken down to 0. Why? Because risk is transparent. Risk is there. There's only one simple rule in play. First in turn, with all due respect to those most vulnerable. In other words, be careful. Cover your ass, if you will, right? Just be careful. So when you come into these intersections, you have no choice but to do what all of us do when we come to an intersection when the power's out, which is what? You slow down, you start thinking, and you look at people. You become much more human. Because the accidents happen in intersections when we think that our risk has been taken care of by something or someone else, and we stop our thinking. They deprive us of the intelligence that we're born with. And interestingly enough, you say, oh, that's just small towns. It won't work in a metropolitan town. Not true. Or a metropolitan city. Not true. This is Exhibition Road. Anyone here go to the Olympics last summer? Anyone? This is, 3 years ago, this is what Exhibition Road in London looked like, 3 years before the Olympics. Exhibition Road, if you don't know, in London is sort of a cultural mecca. This is where all the great academies, the Royal Academy of History and Dance, and this sees 11 million visitors a year. Well, that number was going to be doubled for the Olympics. But take a look at it. It's not user-friendly. Not at all. Pedestrians, it's just not. It's cold. It doesn't allow you to get between buildings and share experience with others. And so the same people that were designing those shared spaces in Europe in outlying areas of the United Kingdom had a 3-year contract and put Exhibition Road to be redesigned it to be a shared space. And this is what it looks like today. Completely friendly, completely open. The same kind of thing. Pedestrians and bicycles and cars and motorcycles all share the same space. And the order and the effectiveness of the organization is emergent. It's self-organizing. And that self-organizing behavior is far more powerful than any traffic controls could be. So the simplest rules create the most effective experience. Lesson number 3, law number 3, limiting information engages the imagination. Too often we think that we need to provide every single piece of information, every single product feature, every technical specification, when in fact the opposite is true. You need the Goldilocks strategy. Too much, people tune out. Not enough, people ignore you. So I tried to track sort of the evolution of this notion of creating intrigue and the ability to get people to lean in to whatever your message is. And I traced it to one Leonardo da Vinci. We often hear about how intriguing and compelling and changing the Mona Lisa's smile is, right? And how mysterious it is. Is she smiling? A lot of people argue about that. I'd read about it in history books. I happened to be in Europe in 2007, and since I wasn't getting any of that from the books that I had seen with the reproductions in it, I went to the Louvre. Anyone been to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa? Okay, so you know she's pretty small. You can't get really close to her, right? But there is something rather compelling about seeing the Mona Lisa in person. And so I looked at her, and she looked normal the first time there, just, you know, kind of a casual smile. I was with my family. We took a turn around. I said, I'm going to go back and take a look at the Mona Lisa. They grumbled, but they came with me. And this time she looked rather tired. And I said, bear with me. You guys hang out here. I'm going to take another turn. I'm going to, you know, change my brain, get different space. I'm going to come back and look at her. And when I did, the third time when I looked at her, I swear to God, she was mocking me. Perhaps because I had done 3 turns just to see the same painting. But here's the history, and here's the technique. Before Leonardo da Vinci came along, paintings were thought to be not very lifelike because they were too precise. They were too accurate, and they were too perfect. Therefore, they didn't leap off the page as having any vitality to them whatsoever. So what Leonardo da Vinci did, and the secret to the Mona Lisa, which has nothing to do with a code or conspiracy with the Vatican or anything like that, is he simply removed something. And he removed this. He removed the lines from around the corners of her mouth and the corners of her eyes. It's a technique he called sfumato, smoky or blurry. Those are the 2 most expressive parts of the human facial anatomy. When they are missing, guess what we do? We provide the solution. We provide the art that's missing here, and she takes on whatever mood, whatever feeling, whatever thoughts that we happen to have, and that's what makes her so mysterious. That's what makes her so changing and dynamic and compelling. Well, is there an application to that in the business world, in the real world, if you will? Yeah, absolutely. And let me, let me make the transition from business, from pure art to business. There's a huge business behind comic books. Anyone here Comic Con goer, comic fan? Okay. What's interesting, I spent some time with a gentleman by the name of Scott McCloud. Does that name ring a bell to everyone? Understanding Comics. And I actually took his comic workshop last year in February. And fascinating gentleman. And what the magic of comics lives not in the panel. Yes, you can be the greatest artist in the world and the greatest comic graphic artist in the world, but where does the magic actually live in comics? What keeps us, our imaginations, engaged? Anyone know, comic lovers? Yeah, it's the space between the panels, which is called, anyone know? The gutter. It's called the gutter. He's tried to change that because it's just sort of a negative kind of thing, but the gutter is really where the brain takes 2 separate images and composes the story. Because take these 2 panels here, which come directly from his book, Understanding Comics. You see in one panel a guy with a raised axe saying, now you die, and the other one going, no, no. And then all you see in the next panel is a scream. Yet you don't know who's screaming. You don't know where that axe fell. You don't know how hard it fell. Well, yes, you do, because you're the one who supplies all of that information. The real criminal in this particular 2-panel sequence is the audience. They're the artist, they're the audience, and they're the creator. And that is the magic. It's the ability of the brain to take 2 dots, if you will, and connect them in a compelling story that you created, and it becomes that much more powerful. My favorite story of this particular law is the story of The Sopranos. How many of you watched The Sopranos when it was... Okay, so what was, those of you who were Sopranos viewers, and actually before I ask that, for those of you who didn't watch The Sopranos, it was an HBO series. Won numerous Emmy Awards, 8-year run on HBO. It was the story of one Tony Soprano, a slightly organized criminal in northern New Jersey. And the big deal about The Sopranos, those Sopranos viewers, was what? The ending, the way it ended, right? There was a 2-year run-up to the ending. David Chase, who was the creator, and it ended in 2007. I don't know what it is about 2007. It was a magic year for subtraction. He announced in 2005 that it was going to end in 2 years, in 2007, June of 2007. He was going to direct and write the last episode, which he hadn't done since the very first season. We were going to find out the answer to a very, very serious question that everyone really was hanging on their seats about. It was Tony Soprano going to get whacked, mob style? Because he was a bad guy. He was a really bad guy. But the problem was David Chase had a really sticky problem, a wicked problem to solve. If he killed off Tony Soprano, half the audience would be alienated, because half the audience, irrespective of the fact that he was a bad guy, loved Tony Soprano. The other half hated him. It was a love-hate relationship. And if he killed Tony Soprano off, guess what happens to his chances for a full-length Hollywood feature film? Out the window, right? So what does he do? He has to solve that problem, and how does he do it? Well, Sunday night, June 12th, we're all tuned in, those of us who were Sopranos watchers. And it's the last episode, and gosh, you're looking at your watch, and it's right at the end, and he's still alive. He's gathered there with his wife and his son and his daughter in this diner, and there's unsavory characters around, and there's music playing, and there's weird lighting, and all kinds of things happening. And just when we think something's going to happen, just when we think the whole thing's going to come to a great close, what happens? Nothing. The entire screen goes absolutely stark black, and everyone in the United States watching this yells down the hall, "Did ya pay the frickin' cable bill?" No one saw it as the ending to the series until the credits rolled, and then we went berserk. Are you kidding me? You're not going to give me the ending here? I got to come up with the own end. Are you kidding me? 8 years I've been watching this show, and I don't know what's going to happen to Tony Soprano? The media went nuts. The next day, New York Times, Washington Post, television, The Daily Show, did a spoof on it. Everybody said, "Cop out, that's fraud, you've defrauded the audience." The whole world sort of went berserk on David Chase. But by the end of Monday afternoon, he came out and he said, "Listen, everything you need to know about the fate of Tony Soprano is in that episode." Bada bing, people went back and they watched it again. HBO made that very easy to do. And we all had DVRs, right? So we watched it not once, not twice, but 3 times. The initial 12 million viewers turned into 36 to 48, 36 by Wednesday, 48 million by Thursday. And what's really interesting is that by the end of the week, 3 endings had emerged on the internet in blogs. The blogosphere went crazy. Blogs with very detailed, logical cases supporting their ending, whether he died or not. Even a YouTube ending was supplied. You see, David Chase had done the letter E thing. He had done the Mona Lisa thing. He had made it a little bit ambiguous, but he had supplied the clues. He had past show references. He had lighting references. He had stuff stuck on people's jackets, clothing. And people were able to connect the dots that he very carefully put there. And he tripled, if not quadrupled, his impact because of it. Limiting information engages the imagination. Lesson number 4, law number 4, creativity thrives under intelligent constraints. We hear a lot about thinking outside the box, but I'm here to tell you there's a lot of room inside that box for creativity. As a matter of fact, the right kind of box, the right kind of constraint will make you more creative. Study after study shows that children play most creatively where? In a sandbox with one toy or an entire yard full of multiple toys. Where are they most imaginative, most playful, most make-believe? In the sandbox with one toy. Right? If I were to say to you, for example, come up in the next 30 seconds with 20 white things, you'd probably get through 5 or 6 very quickly and then start looking up and scratching your head and looking around for the remainder. But if I said to you, think of 20 white things in your kitchen, put a little constraint around it, you'd be able to do that very exercise with little to no difficulty. And intelligent is the right word. The ability to have a stretch goal that's achievable, but is intelligent and drives the kind of creativity and the new thinking that you want is what you're after. Asking someone to work 5 or 10% more, or having a goal of 5 or 10% improvement, often, for the real world, for those of us on the front line, what that often translates to is working harder, not necessarily more innovatively or more smart, if you will. But if you give me a 25% or 30% improvement goal, I really need to rethink entirely how I'm going to achieve that goal. One of my favorite stories is something that took place years ago down where I live in California, in Los Angeles. Remember, you've probably heard about it. Maybe you even lived there at the time, the Northridge earthquake. Huge earthquake, toppled many freeways. One particular freeway, it's an interesting case study because I think it's the notion of how creativity thrives under intelligent constraints. There's an artery in Los Angeles that runs from downtown to the beach, to Santa Monica. At the time, 350,000 people traveled that artery every single day. Well, when the earthquake happened, it toppled a section right in the middle. 350 people were stranded. And California Transportation Authority, Caltrans as it's known, put an early estimate of a combined cost of $1 million a day and a year and a half worth of time. $1 million to get it back up and running. 18 months, $1 million a day. A commercial construction company by the name of C.C. Meyer in the San Francisco Bay Area read that in the paper and said, that can't possibly be right. That can't be right. I'm going to the mayor. He went to the mayor of Los Angeles and he cut a deal. He said, I think I can get that up in under 6 months. I can take 2/3 of that time out of the equation for you. And the mayor said, fine, let's talk about this. They came up with a contract. The actual contract was for 4 months, 120 days. And it was a $15 million contract. And C.C. Meyer put up his own money, a lot of risk involved, because there was a performance attachment to the entire contract. He said, if I come in under that 120 days, I want a bonus, a performance bonus, an incentive, $200,000 a day. The mayor said, fine. Every day you come in past that 120 days, I'm docking you $205,000. Okay? I don't know if you know, anyone who lived there or know the story, but do you know how long it took to get the Santa Monica freeway up and running again? Wild guess? 120 days? Year and a half? 66 days. 66 days. Were they running on the job? Yeah. Were they working 24/7? Yeah. But the interesting thing that they did, and they used some special quick setting concrete, the interesting thing they did required no technology. They simply took the fat out of the process. Fat in terms of waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for the gosh darn inspector. You see, traditional construction is you finish the work, based on a specification, and you wait for the inspector. You wait a couple weeks. You got to schedule him to come out. The inspector comes out, looks at your work, says, nope, that's not the code, and you got to rework it. Then you got to wait again to have him rescheduled. So they made a very, very quick adjustment. They said, listen, in order for us to do this, Mr. Mayor, you need to have an inspector on the job with us 24/7, real time, so that we get our work approved or not as we go, just in time. That's what made the whole thing work. That 120-day constraint allowed them to surpass it by a large margin, and it made a career for C.C. Meyer. He replicated what he did in the San Francisco Bay Area a few years back when one of the bridges toppled. Are you familiar with In-N-Out Burger? Yeah. What do we know about In-N-Out Burger? The secret menu. What you are looking at, In-N-Out Burger, for those of you who don't know, it's a southwestern delicacy. I don't think it's made it to Washington yet. I think they're in California, Nevada, Arizona, Mexico, and I think they've moved into Texas as well. But and they were actually the innovators of the drive-through burger stand. I don't know if you know that, back in 1946. The Snyder's. What you're looking at here is the original menu, and it's never changed. 4 food items, right? You get a double-double, which is 2 slices of cheese, 2 beef patties, and a bun. Cheeseburger, hamburger, French fries, then you've got beverages. It hasn't changed. At least the company hasn't changed it, because they have a very simple rule in place. We'll do anything you want to a burger. That's it. But we're not changing our menu. That's the constraint. Who's changed it? For those of you who know about the secret menu, customers. What's compelling about that is that the number of items on the secret menu, and it's not so secret anymore. You just get on the internet and you can find out what's on it. But what's compelling to me about it is that this goes beyond the Starbucks thing, where there's a plethora of items on an already complex menu. It's a very, very simple menu. It stays simple. If you go to any In-N-Out establishment and ask for, say, a Flying Dutchman, or a protein style, or an animal style, or a grilled cheese, it shows up on your receipt, on your ticket as that. They've standardized the customer-created menu that's got 3 dozen or so items on it. And there is nothing In-N-Out about In-N-Out Burger. The lines are always long, the food is always good, and they've made quite a career out of that kind of constraint. Lesson number 5. These last two lessons, laws, if you will, concern the concept of break. And there are 2 kinds of break. They're the kind that you make, and then they're the kind that you take. So let me take the kind that you make first. What you are looking at here is a Zen rock garden. Anyone ever been to a Niwa garden, a friendship garden? They fascinate me because it's all about patterns, grooves, and the interruption of those patterns to create what I find to be compelling new patterns. And it always astounds me. I mean, I don't know how, we're the frickin' footsteps in this thing, right? How do you do that? There is a concept, a Zen aesthetic design concept called Datsuzoku, which means break from routine, break from normalcy, break with convention. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about break is an important part of breakthrough. Breaking a pattern, whether it's a business model, disruptive business model, whether it's simply a new idea, a spin-off, what have you. When you break that pattern, that's where creativity and innovation, I think, lives. Think about it in your day-to-day existence. You start thinking far more resourcefully when a pattern that you are accustomed to breaks. For example, you're in your car, it's raining, and all of a sudden, bam, you get a flat tire. What do? If you're like me, you curse, right? Curse, right? You're like, ugh! That curse is a signal that things are out of whack, that things are now not normal. And all of the things that you took for granted before now come into play. You start thinking. Your brain is on fire. You're thinking about, oh my gosh, how am I? It's raining, it's slippery. People are already kind of out of control. They don't drive that well anyway, and now it's raining. How am I going to get safely over to the side of the road? All of a sudden, you're aware of everyone around you. You're aware of your inability to maneuver your own vehicle in quite the way that you want to. You start thinking about the tools at your disposal. Do I have a spare? Is the spare, does it have air in it? Do I have the tools to change the thing? All of those things that you took for granted now come into play, and they're all the things that you need to solve the problem, but it was the break that brought them to the fore of your brain, and that's what I'm talking about here. And one of my favorite stories here, and this is sort of the air that I think that you're breathing here, because are you familiar with the term skunk works? You must be, right? Microsoft Research Development has a lot in common, I would think, with Lockheed's Skunk Works, which is their Advanced Development Projects division. How many of you are familiar with the history of Skunk Works, though? A few of us? Okay. So, quick history lesson, because I think it's kind of interesting. We use the term a lot, Skunk Works, to mean what? What does it mean? To those of you, you've heard it. What does it conjure up? Secret project. Yeah, sort of a secret project, right? Secret sauce project, killer app kind of thing. You're sequestered. You're a little bit more autonomous. You've broken away from the main operation with a singular focus to do something by a certain time. Well, all of that came about in 1943. And in 1943, we were in World War II. And all of a sudden, Germany had a jet fighter plane. We didn't. We had prop planes called the P-38. Watch any World War II black and white film, and you will see Lockheed's P-38. That was our de facto fighter plane at the time, a prop fighter plane. Well, and it was designed by one Clarence Kelly Johnson, who was Lockheed's sort of maverick designer. And Lockheed at the time was down in Burbank, California, right next to the airport. Well, the War Department, as soon as Germany had that jet fighter plane, knocked on Lockheed's door. They wanted one man and one man only, 33-year-old Kelly Johnson, because he was the genius, had designed the P-38, and they did the freeway thing. Gave 6 months to come up with a working prototype that competes or bests Germany's jet fighter plane. And Kelly Johnson said, well, where am I going to get the time to do that? We're now 24/7 trying to crank those things out the door. How am I going to do that with all the other things that I've got to do? And he used the constraint to drive his creativity. He said, okay, I know that there's no space at all in this building, in the main manufacturing plant. I'm going to break away. He took with him 30 of the best designers and engineers. He spent his afternoons in a new location. That location happened to be a rented circus tent next to a very stinky plastics factory. It was so stinky that it reminded everyone working there of the Little Abner cartoon and the Skunk Works factory in Dogpatch. Skunk with an O, Skunk Works, right? And we never knew exactly what they were cooking up. And that factory, they put shoes and skunks and everything else, some kind of moonshine. But it reminded everyone, it smelled so bad that one day one of the engineers actually answered the phone, Skunk Works, and it stuck, much to Kelly Johnson's chagrin. And it stuck for 20 years until the publisher of Little Abner, Al Cap's publisher, said, you can't use that anymore. So they came up with a very close cousin, Skunk Works, right? They changed one letter. And that's the actual logo. That's the actual building out in the Mojave Desert. I've tried to get in. You can't. I've tried everything. I've tried numerous calls. I think only one person has gotten in there, one reporter they've let in there. But the notion of Skunk Works is that notion of break, and how sometimes you need to break the pattern of the normal everyday operation, the de facto way of doing business, to break apart, break away, and create a new pattern. Taking a break. I'll conclude with this. Doing something isn't always better than doing nothing. And why do I have a picture of a hippopotamus? Because I learned a very important lesson from one Boyd Matson, who is a National Geographic adventure journalist. We were speaking at the same location, the same event a few years ago, and the title of his talk floored me. I loved it. It was How to Stand Still When the Hippos Charge. I thought, what an elegant solution, right? Who's going to think to do that? We're hardwired to run, right? To fight or flight. If you run, when Mama Hippo decides that you don't like the way she doesn't like the way you're looking at her calf with that big old long telephoto lens, and she charges 2,000 pounds of mad Mama Hippo, if you run, you will die. End of story. Don't care how fast you are. I don't care if you're Carl Lewis. I don't care who, you run the 100 in 8 flat. She will mow you down. Your only choice is to stand still. He wouldn't share with me exactly how he figured that out. But there's a direct application to this. If I were to ask you to do nothing right now, you'd be hard-pressed to do it. Unless you are disciplined in something, for example, like meditation. In other words, trying to absent your brain of all thought, to stop thinking. It's very difficult to do nothing. But you can sort of take a break from your workaday routines. And interestingly enough, there was an experiment run by Boston Consulting Group a few years ago, which has now become company corporate policy. What they did was they took a dozen of their consulting teams, 4 or 5 person teams, and they mandated one night off from work. And consultants, right? They thrive on working all week long, and they love bragging about how hard they're working, right? And they're connected to their smartphone all the time. Well, they said no. You've got to have one scheduled night off where you are not allowed to contact in any way any of your teammates, anything related to work. No email, no snail mail, no phone, no smartphone, no nothing. And it drove the consultants nuts to begin with, right at the start. Why? Well, they thought they were going to miss out on the good project. They thought, oh my gosh, if I can't work that one night, I'm going to have to work the weekend, extra hours. And it made everybody really tense. But they started to get used to it. And the Boston Consulting Group was trying to make the point that sometimes the most productive thing that you can do looks to all the world to be unproductive. There is certain mechanisms and processes in your hippocampus, in the right part of your brain, that you cannot speed up. And those are the things where creativity lives. It's the ability to make connections between seemingly disparate things that your brain requires a quiet mind for. It's why you get your best ideas, not necessarily when you're working on the problem at hand, but when you are taking a hike, you're taking a long language shower, you're taking a nap, you're driving. That's where all these great, insights happen. Because you've steeped yourself in the problem, the solution isn't forthcoming, you step away from it, step away from the problem, take a break, and boom, all of a sudden the connection is made. And sure enough, the experiment proved to be a success. Teams, according to their clients, produced better, more creative work product, better solutions for their clients. Intra-team communication became more efficient because they had slightly less time to say the same thing. So doing something isn't always better than doing nothing. And there are a lot of ways to do this. I don't know if Microsoft has adopted this notion of meditation at work or teaches it, but I know other organizations are doing it. Some of them are your competitors. I know that Larry Ellison does it and requires all of his senior executives to do it. I know that Salesforce.com does it. I know that Google does it. And they teach it at Google University. But there are other ways. I couldn't do it. I can't do it. I can't meditate. I've tried. I've tried it with music. I've tried it with all kinds of things, and I can't do it. There are other things that I can do, though. You can travel. You can pulse your work. Every 90 minutes, take a break. Stretch your legs. Get away from your screen. Just remove yourself. Take that break, and even if it's for 10 minutes. I wrote this book that's in front of you in 6 weeks, because I pulsed my work versus 6 months my previous book, which was actually longer. Now, I kind of cheated because I had 50 people help me write this book and put little essays in, so I subtracted some of myself from the book, but still 6 weeks versus 6 months because I changed the way I work. Pulsing, it's a very, very solid technique. There's neurofeedback that you can do. There's all kinds of techniques to help quiet the mind because there's a lot of research around a certain kind of brainwave preceding that sudden creative insight, which is a gamma ray burst, and you need an alpha wave kind of quiet mind to produce it. So all of those things allow me to answer the real question that I teed up right at the beginning, which is what's an elegance solution? How do you create it? Why do they matter? I think I've answered all those except what the definition of an elegant solution is, and it's here. It's an idea, a strategy, whatever form it takes, a product, a service that achieves the maximum effect with the minimum means. And there's a visual metaphor that I love. It's a diamond. Diamonds are elegant, no question about it. They are the kind of simplicity that's found only on the far side of complexity, made from the simplest compounds on the planet, carbon and oxygen, carbon dioxide. Right? You take a raw gem, a raw stone, to create a piece of jewelry that you want to put on someone's finger. Do you add material to it? You subtract material in a very careful way. And when you subtract it, it actually becomes more complex in structure, in appearance. It's the hardest thing we know. It's cutting edge, literally. It withstands heat and pressure like no other substance that we have. But the overwhelming feature, the overwhelming characteristic of a diamond that makes it so valuable is its clarity. And that's what an elegant solution is. It's a clear solution to a compelling need, a compelling problem. So, and I'll leave you with this final thought. And you heard it at the beginning as well. When you remove just the right things in just the right way, something good happens. In a nod to Michelangelo, who said, I just took the block of marble and crafting the perfect man, David, I removed everything that wasn't David. Okay, so thank you very much. A little bit of shameless self-promotion here. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have some time for questions, and I know there are a lot of people online as well. So do we have any? We'll field some from here. We'll take some online as well. We've got, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or so. Anyone have a question or thought or comment or aha or wondering about? Yeah.
So thinking about subtraction, I think Michelangelo is a good example. The one I thought of was Kevin Flynn, as portrayed in the movie Tron Legacy, where he was an example of do nothing. Sometimes doing nothing was more productive than doing something. And I guess my question is, how do you know when to run for the portal? How do you know when is the right time for action and inaction?
Yeah, in my case, it was because I didn't have any other alternative. I had to almost literally try a different way of thinking because it doesn't come naturally. And I wouldn't suggest that this is easy, natural, or intuitive, at least not in the Western world. It comes a little bit more naturally to the Eastern ways of thinking because silence and pauses and emptiness is a much more exalted characteristic. There's no easy way to know, but if you focus on the second half of those three choices, so anytime you've got a choice in front of you, also consider what to not do, what to leave out, what to, or restrain from adding in the first place, and what to ignore. A good way of, and I'm always asked, how do you get started with this? How do I know what to subtract? Easy. Ask someone who is in direct receipt of what you do on a daily basis. What's the one or two things that you would love for me to remove, eliminate, or stop doing? And you may just need to interject and shut them up because they will go on. There are a lot of things that we are doing. Ask your spouse, ask your partner, ask them, what is it that you would love for me to not do anymore? They'll go on and on. There's a lot of room for subtraction in our life. And if you want to think about it business-wise, think about, well, what would my competitor really struggle with if I were to stop doing? That's another way to think about it. Yeah.
So I don't know if you know or not, Microsoft's in the middle of a big cultural change in how they approach design, and one of the core tenets is content before Chrome and simplification. As a designer and a developer, though, one of the challenges we're seeing in implementation, or that I'm seeing in implementation, is just as in engineering it's bad to over-engineer or maybe pre-optimize too early. A lot of people, as they're trying to implement this, are oversimplifying too early, where they're trying to find the simple before they work through the complex. So they're going to change all fonts to Segu 42 and put everything in a magenta box and it's good to go, right? And that's horrible design, right? So how do we help the educational efforts to get the laws of subtraction out, but not have people fall into the first obvious trap of simplifying too early, or mistaking elegance from bare bones, right? To simplify all the life out of it. Basically simplify till there's nothing else and no more.
When minimalization becomes the goal, you're in as much of a trap as the other extreme. So you need to think about what's not necessarily the way to minimize things or simplify, but what's the essence? What is the essence of the solution? And I spend a lot of time with teams in rapid iteration loops, very lean, very, very low fidelity prototypes, where you haven't invested a lot of time and you find out really quickly whether you're oversimplifying things or overcomplicating things. And you do that in a couple days where you challenge your assumptions, you think very scientifically, but you build something, whether it's out of paper, and you very quickly test it with a potential user and get feedback on it, and so that you know that you're on the right track. It's to use the lingo at IDEO, it's enlightened trial and error, right? I think is the best way to go. So sometimes you can overthink simplification, right? So if that becomes the ultimate goal, then I think you're almost on near side simplicity, which is not where you want to be.
Actually, the question, the response is just yesterday, I was talking to a friend of mine who works with kids building Lego robots, and he's teaching them robots. And they had a task they were trying to do, and they created this big long code, and they kept adding things onto it, and it was getting incredibly complex, and it wasn't working that well. And he just went and deleted everything. And the kids all went, and freaked.
Yeah.
He said, "What are you trying to do?" And they had like 14 blocks down to 3. Yeah. Just by, they went through I think they had to do that exercise of learning the complex thing and then saying, okay, let's throw this all away and start over, now that we understand the problem we're trying to solve.
Yeah. Listen, there's a reason why Costco is successful, right? I mean, we are hardwired to add, to hoard, and to store, right? 36 rolls of toilet paper makes us feel pretty good about ourselves, right? But, so we got to fight that common instinct. You had a question.
Yeah, so you're selling subtraction to us. Sometimes subtraction in the work environment is a bit of an outlier. It may be an addition kind of organization you're in. How much is the selling of subtraction or that approach part of the actual doing of it? And should one do it the same way you're doing it?
I don't know if there's any one way to do it. I have learned the hard way. That's sort of how I learn by nature, is the hard way, unfortunately. But I do things one at a time. One of the things I learned at Toyota was the notion of lean thinking and sort of one-piece flow. So, for example, in an organization that wants to, hey, Matt, can you come and teach the whole organization subtraction? No. I can teach one team, I can work with one team and see how well, if it works, in this particular kitchen, right, in this particular environment, and go from there. And what we do is to very simply get all of the work that we do very visible, whether it's a customer-facing problem, an internal problem, but we make it very visible. And once you make things visible, it's like those shared space street concepts, there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of all of those 7 things. There's a lot of excessive stuff, confusing stuff, and that's what we start picking off very surgically. And so that's how I do it. I do it one team at a time, very organically, and then people go, what? Something's different with that team. That's kind of cool because now my life is better. Right? And now they're leaning in, and then we go that way.
So do you have to pull them through the complexity part in order so that they can appreciate the simplicity at the other side?
There is no reason to even talk about simplicity or subtraction without the concept of complexity. If you ignore, there's no reason to. It's like, why talk about light if there's no dark, right? Why talk about trust if there's no vulnerability? Right? There's no reason to talk about simplicity or subtraction without complexity. So you've got to live that complexity. And the best way to do it is by those on the receiving end, to become someone on the receiving end of whatever complexity you're delivering. And we all do it. It's a complex word, it keeps getting more complex. So yes, you got to live through that, and it's painful, right? And it's messy. If there were anything clean about this, everybody would be doing it, and there would be no reason for me to stand up here talking about it. There's a question online? One last question? Oh, sorry. Okay, let's do it from online then.
One last question from online viewer. Have you used Windows 8? And
have I used Windows 8? What was the second half?
And does it hit your thesis?
I'd love to say no comment. Sometimes doing nothing is better than saying something. I played with it, and I played with, I wrote here's how I can answer that question. Go to Fast Company Design. On Halloween Day, I wrote sort of a tongue-in-cheek article about the feature creep. As the creepiest creep of all is the feature creep. And I left a lot of folks unscathed. Apple folks, Microsoft folks, you name it. So it wasn't bad. It was just poking and prodding at the things that we often think are. I mean, even I got the iPhone 5. It's bigger than my iPhone 4. What happened? Steve Jobs goes away, and all of a sudden things are getting bigger, right? And not necessarily better, right? The whole maps. I could go on and on. Just beware of the feature creep. It's the creepiest creep of all, and that's how I'm going to answer that question. Thank you very much.